ball over the green up against the clubhouse.
Sailing towards dead centre of the clubhouse. Pitches boldly, no stops.
You know, the ball jumped a bit.
Are we in for more fun again? But there's no way he can play that right-handed.
Only in Britain could you see that. The old geezer, the secretary, had his head out the window looking around the corner, and here I'm playing. The members are having drinks on top of me, and I've got to ask them to please keep quiet. They're having a drink on top of me while I'm playing.
Could you just hold it a minute, please?
A rules official walked onto the 18th green at Royal Lytham in St. Anne's, looked down at what a legend had just done, and froze. Not from the coastal wind cutting in off the Lancashire coast, not from the weight of the moment. He froze because he saw something that should have ended the tournament right there. He saw something that should have rewritten history, and then he said nothing. That is the story we are telling today. Not the story that was sold to the world on television. Not the miracle, not the heroics. The real story, the one that has lived in golf locker rooms for 50 years, passed around in whispers, treated like a secret too dangerous to say out loud. The one that officials buried, broadcasters ignored, and the sport's most powerful institution decided the public simply did not need to know. Golf built its entire identity on honesty. That is not a small thing. While other sports spent the 70s drowning in labor disputes and referee scandals, golf stood apart. It marketed itself as the gentleman's game. Players called penalties on themselves. The rulebook was treated like scripture. Fans trusted what they saw because the sport told them, over and over, that it was different, that it was cleaner, that it was better. And for millions of people around the world tuning in on color television for the first time, golf was exactly that. A sport you could believe in. A sport that felt safe to love without reservation. If you are enjoying this story so far and want to push it to more golf fans, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype. It genuinely helps get the story out there. Now back to 1974. The sport was turning into a brand. That shift matters more than most people realize because it explains everything that came after. The 1970s was the golden age of sports broadcasting. Color television had arrived. Satellite signals were carrying golf into 30 or more countries. The prize fund at the Open Championship had grown from £40,000 to £50,000 in just a few years. Advertisers from luxury companies and financial institutions were paying serious money to be associated with the game. And the game was selling them one thing above everything else: purity. Golf was clean. Golf had integrity. Golf did not cheat. That was the product. That was the promise being made every single week on televisions across the world. The face of that integrity was the big three: Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Gary Player. These were not just athletes. They were the living symbols of what the sport claimed to be. And of the three, Gary Player carried perhaps the loudest public persona around honor and dignity. The Black Knight, as he was known, spoke often about discipline, about doing things the right way, about the code of the game. This made him more than just a champion. It made him a representative of the sport itself. His image was carefully constructed and widely believed, which is exactly why what happened at Royal Lytham in 1974 was so dangerous, and why the people who saw it chose to look away. The 1974 Open Championship introduced a rule change that seems small, but turned out to matter enormously. For the first time, the R&A made the larger 1.68-inch ball compulsory for all competitors. This was the ball that had long been standard in the United States. In the coastal winds of Lancashire, it behaved differently. It was harder to control. It was significantly more difficult to find and extract from the thick, rain-soaked rough and gorse that lined the fairways at Royal Lytham. The difference between a clean lie and a disaster was measured in inches. The difference between finding your ball and losing it entirely could come down to seconds. That new ball in those conditions, on that course, made the rough more punishing than it had ever been before. Under the rules at the time, a player had exactly 5 minutes to find a lost ball. If that search failed, the punishment was severe. The player returned to the spot of the previous shot and played again with a penalty of stroke and distance. In a tight championship, that sequence, sometimes called a lost ball double, could erase a lead in a single moment. This context is essential, because what happened at the 17th hole on the final day only makes sense when you understand how much was at stake in those 5 minutes. A championship lead can feel enormous right up until the moment the clock starts running in the rough. Gary Player was leading the tournament by several strokes when he stepped up to the 17th, a 453-yard par 4. His second shot was a disaster. The ball veered sharply offline and disappeared into a dense thicket of gorse bushes and long grass roughly 100 yards from the green. The search began immediately. Player, his caddy Alfred Dyer, known as Rabbit, and several marshals dropped to their knees and worked through the rough. The clock was running. Witnesses on the scene watched the frantic search. And then, with just 15 seconds remaining in the 5-minute window, the ball was found. That is the official story. That is what the BBC broadcast sold. A buzzer-beater discovery. A miracle find. A champion refusing to quit. But the details reported by observers on the scene told a very different story, and those details have never been adequately explained. The first problem was location. Witnesses clearly saw the original shot land in the deep thicket, approximately 100 yards from the green. The ball that was eventually found was sitting in much lighter rough approximately 60 yards from the green. That is a significant difference. A ball does not travel 40 yards sideways through dense gorse on its own. The second problem was timing. Finding any ball in 15 seconds after a 5-minute search had produced nothing is extraordinarily unlikely. The search had appeared hopeless moments before the discovery. Then suddenly the ball appeared right at the edge of the clock. The third problem was the condition of the ball itself. Witnesses noted that the ball was remarkably clean. Royal Lytham in 1974 was rain-soaked. The rough and gorse were muddy and matted. A ball slicing into that environment at speed would almost certainly be coated in debris, mud, grass stains, and gorse needles. A clean ball in that setting strongly implied it had come from somewhere dry, like a trouser pocket. The rumors about Caddy Rabbit Dyer have circulated for decades. The allegation, never proven but widely repeated in golf circles, is that Dyer realized the championship was slipping away and quietly dropped a substitute ball with identical markings into a more favorable position, while the crowd's attention was focused on the chaotic search. Think about what that would have required. Someone calm enough to act in the middle of a frantic scene, with marshals and cameras nearby, with thousands of spectators pressing in from every side. And yet the three anomalies, the wrong location, the impossible timing, and the clean ball, all point in exactly the same direction. These allegations gained further weight when local members of Royal Lytham and St. Anne's allegedly discovered a ball with markings matching players in the original deep thicket several days after the tournament ended. That ball was reportedly handed to open officials and stored in a safe. It was not used as evidence. It was not investigated publicly, it was stored away, and it allegedly sat in that safe with a note attached that read, "Mr. Player, the ball." Even inside the governing body, it seems, there were people who were deeply uncomfortable with what had been allowed to happen. Even if you could argue the 17th was messy and unclear, the 18th gave a front-row view. There was no ambiguity at the final hole. There was a direct witness and a direct violation, and the only question was whether anyone would act on what they saw. After his approach shot on 18, Player's ball came to rest against the stone wall of the clubhouse. Officials ruled that the building was an integral part of the course, which meant Player was not entitled to a free drop. He was forced to play the ball as it lay, and to do that, he chose to play a left-handed recovery shot using the back of his putter. It was an unusual and difficult situation. Before playing, he paused to demand that spectators gathered on the clubhouse roof remain still. Their shadows, he said, were distracting him. That interaction pulled attention upward, toward the roof, toward the gallery. Upon returning to address the ball, Player made what witnesses described as an exaggeratedly long mock practice stroke. This was not a normal waggle or a routine rehearsal. The club had moved approximately 1 inch of soil and sand directly from behind the ball. It dug a small trench. It excavated a trough. In plain terms, it improved the lie of the ball and the area of the intended swing. Rule 13-2 of the rules of golf forbids exactly this. A player cannot improve the lie of the ball or the area of intended swing through any action during play. What happened on the 18th green was a textbook violation of that rule. It was also done in full view of a veteran rules official who was standing only yards away. That official saw it. According to the accounts that have survived in golf's unofficial memory, he saw the soil move. He saw the trench form. He understood immediately what it meant, and he froze. That freeze was not confusion. It was not a moment of doubt about what the rule said. It was a psychological collision between the rulebook in his hand and the figure standing in front of him. On one side of that collision was a clear violation. On the other side was a global icon, a champion, a centerpiece of the sports commercial empire, playing on international television in front of an audience spanning 30 or more countries. Calling the penalty would have meant accusing Gary Player of cheating on live television. It would have meant a potential disqualification. It would have meant the biggest scandal in golf's modern history landing right in the middle of the sport's most commercially valuable decade. The official chose the narrative over the rulebook. He stayed silent, and in that silence, the game's image beat the game's rules. That single moment of inaction cost the sport something it has never fully recovered. The cover-up that followed was not spontaneous. It was systematic. Insiders have long claimed that a high-ranking tournament director became aware of what the official had witnessed and intervened. The directive was described as simple. A controversy of this scale would be bad for the game. The official's written account of what he observed at the 17th and 18th holes was allegedly misplaced. Some accounts suggest it was destroyed. The official himself was quietly moved to lower-profile assignments for the remainder of the season and eventually left the game entirely. The BBC broadcast and the official scorecards recorded the events as a miracle find and a legendary recovery. In an era before non-stop sports media and social media, the governing body held near total control over the official story. And they used that control without hesitation. The 1974 incident did not stand alone. 9 years later, a parallel moment played out in front of witnesses who were not willing to stay silent. At the 1983 Skins game at Desert Highlands, Tom Watson publicly accused player of cheating on the 16th hole. Watson witnessed a player moving a leaf from behind his ball. In professional golf, a leaf that is growing or attached to a branch is not a loose impediment and cannot be moved if doing so improves the lie. Watson's response was direct and unambiguous. He accused player to his face. He said he was tired of it. He said he saw it. This confrontation happened in the presence of Jack Nicklaus and rules official Joe Day. Unlike the official at Royal Lytham, Watson refused to let the moment be buried. But even then, the institutional response moved to protect the brand. Player won the majority of the prize money. Watson's accusations were publicly dismissed. The system absorbed the challenge and kept moving. The whispers in the locker rooms, though, were growing louder. Fellow professionals from that era described a repertoire of techniques that peers had observed over the years. The fairway wood tamp, using a heavy wood to flatten grass behind a ball in the rough under the cover of testing the wind or changing clubs, then switching to an iron for a cleaner strike. The high replace, lifting a ball to identify it in the rough and setting it back down in a noticeably higher and more accessible position. The shadow diversion, creating a distraction with the gallery or the caddy to allow a brief adjustment to the lie. None of these things were proven in a court. But the volume and consistency of the accounts, coming from professionals who had nothing obvious to gain by speaking, built a picture that was hard to ignore. When multiple respected peers describe the same patterns independently, it stops being a rumor and starts being a record. When the establishment allows the rules to flex for the stars, the people who play by the rules notice. They do not forget. If the rules bend for the biggest names, what is the sport really selling when it calls itself the gentleman's game? The most dangerous lie told at the 1974 Open was not in the rough at the 17th hole. It was in the story that got sold afterward. The miracle, the heroics, the champion on his hands and knees, finding his ball against all odds with seconds to spare. That story was constructed, packaged, and broadcast to millions of people who had no reason to doubt it. The sport had spent decades building the trust that made that broadcast believable, and it spent that trust in a single afternoon. What makes it worse is how close the truth came to surfacing. An official saw it clearly. He attempted to file a report. Local members allegedly found the physical evidence days later. Even within the governing body, there were people uncomfortable enough with the cover-up to attach a note to a ball and keep it in a safe. The truth did not disappear. It was suppressed. There is a significant difference. Suppression requires effort. It requires decisions made by real people in real rooms, choosing the brand over the game, choosing the image over the truth. The rules of golf exist because the sport cannot function without them. In a game where players are often alone in the rough, out of direct camera view, the entire structure rests on personal honesty. When that honesty is protected at the top and treated as optional for the famous, the foundation erodes. Not just for officials, not just for fellow professionals, for every amateur who has called a penalty on themselves on a quiet Thursday morning because they believed the game required it. Those people deserved better from the institution that was supposed to protect what they believed in. The record books show Gary Player as the 1974 Open champion. That result stands. But the secret knowledge that has traveled through golf's locker rooms for half a century suggests that the trophy came at a cost the sport has never fully accounted for. The rules official who froze was not the villain of the story. He was a man caught inside a system that had decided its own image was worth more than its own rules. The villain was the system itself, and the decision it made that afternoon to protect a brand at the expense of the game. Golf is still worth believing in. The rules still matter. Every player who calls a penalty on themselves, every official who makes the hard call, regardless of the name on the scorecard. Every fan who cares whether the result was clean, they are all part of what makes the sport real. The 1974 Open is not just a scandal. It is a reminder. Truth in sport is not automatic. It has to be protected, even when protecting it is uncomfortable, even when the person standing in front of you is a legend. Especially then, the game is only as honest as the people willing to say what they saw. If this story moved you, hit like, leave a comment below, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. The game deserves people who care enough to ask the hard questions.